Code Explained says hi. Today we are going to create a responsive website. It's going to be a COVID-19 statistic. So we will show some statistics of COVID-19 for the user. So when a user enters our website, based on their IP address, we will get to know their country name so we could show the right statistics. So for example here, if I go and change my IP address using a VPN, for example, I'm going for USA. If I then refresh the page, you can see that now we are getting the statistics for the USA. So based on my IP address, the website will show the statistics for my country. Now the user can also change the country from here to see, for example, the statistics for another country. For example, if I click on Spain, then you can see the statistics for Spain. For example, we go for Italy here. Now I get statistics for Italy. So whenever I click or change my country, our website will send a request for an API, then we'll get back the data for that country. Also, here we have a long list of countries. The user can use this search box to search for a country. For example, it says Spain, so I'm going to go and type in S. You can see now that all the countries that starts with the letter S are the one that we show to the user. If I go and type in P, now it's just Spain that starts with S and P. If I click on Spain now, you can see that we got the statistics for Spain. Also, when I click on change, I can close the country list using this button here. So if I click on this X button here, I can close the search country box. So now the last thing is that the website here is a responsive website. So if I change the width of the window of my browser, you can see that it's a responsive website. Cool. Now, so to create this, we're going to use just HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. So let's go. So first, let's talk about our coding project plan. So when the user enters our app or website, we will use a plugin called GeoPlugin. This is an API. This will use, or based on the IP address of the user, they will return the country code of the user, right? So we will get the country code, which is a 2-digit code. This one here, it's a universal code, so this doesn't change. Instead, the name of the country of the user might change. For example, if the language changes. So we're getting the country code of the user, and then we're going to use an array called country list to figure out the country name based on the country code. Now we will send the country name to an API and get all the statistic back to the user. Right, now this is how the GeoPlugin works. We need to add the script tag given by them into our HTML code, and then we can use any of the functions below to get the informations we want. For us, we're going to use the GeoPlugin _ country code function. So this will return the country code of the user. Now this is our country list. This function will return the country code. So we need to check all the elements inside our array country list for the one that has the exact same country code we got from the GeoPlugin. So for each is what we need here. So for each country in our country list, we're going to check if it's country code, if the country code, this one here, if the country code is the same as the one we got from the API here, from the GeoPlugin API. If it's true, then we just figured out the user's country name. Now, because we are going to use promises, I'm going to talk about them a little bit. So what is the difference between promises and callbacks? So why do we need to use promises? Actually, there is no difference between promises and callbacks. Promises are just a better way or a practical way of doing callbacks. Okay, let's see some examples. So we have here a function called load data and a function show data. This one will return some data, and then this will console log the data. Now, if I run this 2 lines of code here, when I call the function load data, this line of code will get executed right away. Why? Because this is synchronous code. And then after this finishes, then we go and run this line of code here. The console.log here is actually synchronous code, so this will get executed right away. So synchronous code always get executed as we expected. Now let's see the asynchronous version of this code. We have our function load data that will return some data. But in the real world, this function here will send a request to a server and then it will get a response. So this needs some time. To stimulate that, I'm going to use the setTimeout function here. So for example, the time needed for this to be done is 2 seconds. Now we have the function show data to show or to console log the data. And then if I use the same lines of code here, let's say let data equal load data with a URL and then show data, when we take a look on our console, we will find there undefined. Data is undefined. Why? Because when we call the function load data, setTimeout here is asynchronous code, so JavaScript will take this aside, right? Then it will call the function show data, console log now is synchronous code, so this will get executed first. So synchronous code get executed first and then asynchronous code. So here data is undefined, so when we call the function show data, we will see undefined in our console log. Now, how can we prevent this from happening, or how can we solve this issue? To solve the issue, we're going to use callbacks. So here, instead of just returning the data, I'm going to use a callback. A callback is just a function that we will pass into our function load data as a parameter. Now, instead of these 2 lines of code here, I'm just going to say load data, the URL, and our function, the callback show data here. Now, when we run this code here, when the load data finishes, it will call our function show data with the data passed in. So we solved here the problem using a callback. But the problem with callbacks, they will lead to what we call a callback hell. What do we mean with a callback hell? We mean that when you use callbacks to solve such problems, like when you need to wait for something to finish, then you need to do some other things. You use callback to solve such problems, you will get unmanageable code. So that's what we call a callback hell. You can go and search for it. So now to solve the problem callback hell, we will use what we call promises. I'm not going to talk about how to create a promise. I'm just going to talk about how promises deal with such problems or issues. So let's say our function here, load data, will return a promise, right? Now, to get the same result we got before here, I'm just going to go and say load data function with a URL, right? Now, I'm going to append to this a method called then. So promises here have a method called then. What this does, the then method here will fire up only if this here finishes, if this is resolved. So when this gets executed and finishes, then this code here will get executed. So this really solves the callback hell problem. Actually, you can append another then. So let's say this will take some time to get executed. Well, what you're gonna do is use another then method there. The code inside this then here only get executed when this finishes, right? Now, something we didn't talk about is taking care of errors, because the errors may happen when you send a request to a server and then you get back a response. Some error could happen in the way. Again, using callbacks to handle errors is going to be such a big problem. But with the promises, it's going to be really easy. So all what you're going to do is use a method called catch. And this will catches any error that happens at any stage here. So if the error happens here, you're gonna catch it. If the error happens here, you're gonna catch that error. If it happens anywhere, you will get to catch that error. Okay, now we're going to talk about Fetch API. Because once we know the user's country, we will need to fetch the data from the API. So we're going to use fetch. The fetch here takes in at least a URL. And fetch returns a promise, because this will take some time. So all I'm going to do is append the then method here. The then method fires up when this finishes or when this resolves. Now the response we get from the API is usually an HTTP response. So what we need to do here is to extract the JSON body content. So this HTTP response here has a body. In that body we have the actual JSON file that we want. So that's where the data we want lives. So for that we're going to use a method called .json. So when we say return response.json, this will simply read the data and parse the data. Now this will take some time to get resolved. So here I need to use a then method again. So here, after this resolves, we will get some data. That data now is a JavaScript object or an array, for example, string, number, etc. And now you can do anything you want with the data here inside this arrow function. And of course, you're going to need to handle the errors. So you're going to need to use the catch method. So this will catch any error. And of course, you have the choice to do anything you want with the error. Now this is exactly what we are going to do in our project. So fetch, we're going to use fetch. We're going to use the URL for our API. We get an HTTP response. We extract the JSON file from the response and parse it. So we will get a JavaScript object. Now I will talk about the data we're going to get from the API we're going to be using in this project. So as you can see here, we get an object, right? This object here has some properties, which are dates here, as you can see. Now every property here has a value, which is again an object, which has properties that has some values that we need. So this is the values we need here. So for example, total cases, total deaths, total recovered, etc. Now to get this, I will use fetch, right? Takes in the URL of the API, right? Then I need to parse and read the JSON file, and then use a then, and then console log the data. This is how I got this. The problem here with this object is it has some properties I don't know. Okay, to simplify things, I'm gonna use an example here. Let's say we have the car object. The car object here has some properties, name and model. Now, as you know them, you know that the car have a property called name. To access its value, or what you're gonna say, car.name, right? Because you know that property, but in our case here, we don't know those properties. So what if you want to get access to these properties when you don't know them? What you're gonna do? So you don't know that the car has a property called name or called model, and still you need to get the values here. So here we're going to use object.keys method. So here this method will take in the object. So the object here in this example it's gonna be car. And this method here will return all the enumerable properties of the object car. So if we set this to a variable called properties and we take a look on the properties here variable, it's gonna be an array of all the enumerable properties of our object car. So that's what we are going to do with our data here. So I'm going to use object.keys on our data, which is an object here, and this will return an array of all these properties you can see here, which are dates. That's why I'm going to save this in an array called dates. Now the question is, how can we access the values of these properties we get using this method keys here? It's simple. I'm going to say car with, for example, properties with index 0, and this will return car. So properties here with index 0 is the first property, which is going to be name. So now the value of that property is going to be car. So this is the case for just the first, for example, property. But for getting the values of all the properties, we're going to use a for each method. So dates is an array. I'm going to use a for each method. So for each date here, to get the data, I'm just going to do the same thing here. So I'm just going to say data here, which is an object, with index date. And I'm going to set this to a variable called data. Now this data here will be just this whole object here. Now what I'm going to do with this data here is that I'm going to save it in another array. So I'm going to push the data into an array called app data. So this is where all the data we get from the API are saved for our app, right? And because we're going to show a chart for our user, so we need to draw a line chart for total recovered, total deaths, and total cases. So I will need to save this separately in separate arrays. So I'm going to create cases list for total cases, and then I'm going to push data.total cases. But before pushing this to our array, I will need to get rid of this comma here. So I'm going to use the replace method here. So I'm going to replace the comma here with nothing. So I'm going to remove this comma here, right? Now this is not a number, this is a string. So I'm going to use the parseInth method, right? So first I'm going to remove the comma, and then I'm going to pass this into an integer, right? And I'm going to do the same thing for the total recovered and the total deaths. Now it's time to show data to the user. So here I have a look on the app data array for the USA. Now we have to show the data like so. So the country name, the total cases, new cases, total recovered, new recovered, total deaths, new deaths. So to get the total cases, for example, or the total recovered, the total deaths, we need to go to the last entry, which is this one here, which is this element with the index 50. Right, so to get this here, this last element, I'm going to call this last entry, which is equal to app data with index. So you can see here that the length of the app data is 51, and the last entry or the last element index is 50. So it's just 51 minus 1. So the last element's index in an array, it's just going to be app data the length minus 1. So now, for example, if I want to get the country name, all I'm going to say last entry that country name. So here it says country underscore name. And then to show the total cases, I'm going to say last entry dot total cases, total recovered for recovered, total deaths for deaths. And then for new cases, I'm going to say last entry dot new cases. For deaths, I'm going to say last entry dot new deaths. But for the recovered, I don't have here a property called new recovered. So how I can figure out the new recovered? It's simple. The new recovered is just the total recovered of today minus the total recovered of yesterday's. So here we need to get the total recovered of yesterday's date. So I'm going to say last entry or before last entry equals app data. Now I'm gonna say here -2. Now all I'm gonna say is last entry dot total recovered minus before last entry dot total recovered is gonna be the new recovered for today. Now it's time to show the chart for the user. So the chart will going to look like this. We have here this line here is for the cases, total cases. This one is for the recovered and the deaths. First, whenever you want to use a library, you need to see their documentations. So that's what I'm going to do. And then I scroll down and go to the axis, then linear. Then they show me this code here if I want a chart like this. So I will just go and copy this code here and use it to draw the chart. So here I'm going to create a variable called axis linear chart, a global variable, and then set that variable equal to new chart here. The type here is line. Data, it says data sets, label, the data, labels, and some options there. Now you can see here that the data here is an array, right? So that's why I told you before to save, for example, the total cases inside an array, the total recovered inside an array, and the total deaths inside an array. So each one of these here has its own data inside its own or a separate array. So here, for example, for the cases here, the data are saved inside the cases underscore list, right? Now, the labels here, it's gonna be dates. The labels here outside the data sets, it's gonna be dates. So we're going to show the dates in this axis here. Now for the label here, it's gonna be cases. So these are the labels for the data sets. Now I'm going to set the fill property to false, because if I set it to true, I'm going to get something like this here. It's going to be filled. Then the border color is going to be white for cases. Then the background color of the dots here is going to be white also. And then the border width is going to be 1. So here I want this to be thin, because by default it's gonna be thick. Now, what about the others? This one here for recovered and that's. All I'm gonna do here is add another comma, an object like this one, but in this case for the recovered. So I'm gonna put this inside the data sets, and the label here is gonna be recovered. The data is gonna be an array, which is the recovered list array. Then fill is also set to false. The color here is gonna be this color green here, and the border width is also going to be 1. And then the same thing for the deaths line here. It's going to be, the label is going to be deaths. The data is in the deaths list array. Fill is false, and the color is going to be red. Now for the options here, I'm going to use two properties. The first one is going to be responsive. So I want this chart here to be responsive. We are creating a responsive website, and the maintain aspect ratio is going to be set to false. So what do we mean by this? If I set this to true, for example, when I change the width of the window of my browser, then also the height will change accordingly to the width. Now I'm going to put this inside a function called drawAxisLinearChart. So this function will be called whenever I update the recovered list, the that's list, and the cases list. So whenever these are updated, the data inside are updated, we need to call again the drawAxisLinearChart to update the chart here. But first, before we update the chart, we need to destroy the last one. So I'm going to say here, if there was an old chart there, I need to destroy that chart first and then draw the new chart. Now our user can change the country by clicking on the button Change. When he clicks on Change, a div or a box comes up. So here, this is a div with the class name search country. Inside we have the search input here and the close button. So they are both inside a div with the class name search box. And then these countries here are inside our div with the class name country list. Now all these countries here, we're not going to type them by hand. Instead, we're going to get them from our country list. So our country list has almost 203 countries. We're not going to type them all by hand. So we're going just to use a for loop or a for each method to push these countries into our list here. Now this number here, the total of the countries in our country list, is just the length of the country list array, right? Now as you can see here, we have 3 lists, right? So we have the first UL list with the index list -0, then list -1, then list 2. So we are going to have a number of UL list equals to 3. Now the first thing we're going to do is to create this list here, this 3 list here. So I will go and select my element country list, this element here, using the query selector, and then I will edit the inner HTML of the country list. I'm using here a plus sign, so I won't overwrite anything that was there before in the inner HTML of the country list. So I'm going to set this equal to a UL list with an ID. The ID is going to be UL list ID. This is a variable. This variable here is just a string that is equal to list dash and I. The I here could be 0 or 1 or 2. So I will initiate I with 0. So here I is set equal to 0 when we start creating the list. Then after some time it will be equal to 1. That's how we will create these 3 lists here. So when do we increment the I here? So we'll increment I when we added the amount of countries we want to be in each list here. That amount of list is just the number of countries divided by the number of UL lists. So we have here 203 countries, so we will divide this by 3. We have here 3 lists. The number of countries here is just the length of the country list. So here it's just like saying 203, the number of countries, divided by 3, the number of UL lists. Now whenever we add this amount of countries into a list, we need to increment the I by 1, so to go to the next one, right? Okay, now this will go inside the for each method, so we need to add the country by country, and here this arrow function here will take as arguments the country and its index, right? The index here of this country here is 0, 1, 2, etc. Now I will add a UL list to the inner HTML of the country list element in one condition only. Only if the index modulo the number of countries divided by the number of UL lists is equal to 0. So this is how I will make sure that I added this number of countries into the previous list. Now this number here is going to be a decimal number and the index is an integer. So an integer modulo a decimal number will never be equal to 0. So what I'm going to do here, I will use a method called ceil. So the math.ceil here is a method that will return the smallest integer greater than this number here, so which is 68. Let's see how this will happen. When we first run this code here, the first country will be USA. Its index will be 0, right? So 0 modulo 68, it's gonna be 0. So this is true, right? Now the UL list ID is equal to list I is equal to 0, so list dash 0. Now I will push this list here to our country list element. So we are pushing this one here to the list. Now I plus plus, so now I is equal to 1, right? Then we are going to add the countries to this list here till we get to the country with the index 68. Because again 68 modulo 68 will be equal to 0. Now the UL list ID will be equal to list dash 1. We push that to our country list element in our HTML. I plus plus, now I is equal to 2. Now we will keep adding those countries into the second list till we get to 68 plus 68 modulo 68, which will be equal to 0. So you get the idea. Now the code for adding the countries is going to be like this. Document that get element by ID. So each list here has an ID, which is this variable here. Then the inner HTML will be equal, so plus equal here. So we are not overriding the inner HTML of the list. So it will be equal to an li list here with some attributes onClick and the ID here. So onClick here, when we click on a country, when I click on this, I will need to send this country name to the API to get the data from the API. So that's why we call this function here fetch data. So the fetch data will just send the country name to the API to get back the data for that country. The ID will also be just the country name, and inside of the li list is what we show to the user here. It's also just the country name. Now I will put this inside the function called create country list, and the parameters of the function are country list element, the country list array, and the number of UL lists. Now no matter how countries you have in the country list, let's say you updated the country list array, you added some countries or you moved some countries, this will always work. Now let's go to the last the last part in our logic part from our tutorial. So we're going to talk about search country. So when the user types in, for example, a letter T, all the countries with T will appear here and all the other countries will be hidden. So this is an input. I'm going to select this input using the get element by ID, right? And then I'm going to add an event listener to this input here, which is an input event here. The input event here fires up only if the value of the input here changes. So whenever I type in something or delete something, the value of this input changes, so this event here will fire up. Now the first thing we will do when this fires up is to get the value of the input. So it's going to be just input that value. We will set this to a variable called value, and then I will use a for each method to loop over all these countries here to check if the value the user has typed in the input matches one of these countries here. So I will use an if statement. If the country name here starts with the value the user typed in, then we need to show that country, else we need to hide that country. So starts with here is a built-in method. So this will check if this country name here starts with the value. For example, if I put in U here, the letter U, this USA starts with U, so this will come as true. So if this is true, I'm going to select the element here for the country. So I'm just going to use the get element by ID, and if you remember, every country here has an ID which is its name. So it's going to be just country.name here for the ID. Then I'm going to get to its class list, so this will return all the class names for this element here. Then I'm going to use a method called remove, this will just remove a class name called hide. The class name called hide is inside our CSS file. It has only one property, which is display, which is set to none. So whenever I add this class name to an element here, it will be hidden. If I remove that from that element, then we will show back that element. So removing hide from the class list of an element here, of a country here, this will make it show up. But if I add the hide class name to the class list of that country, this will make it hidden. So this is exactly what we want, right? Now you can see some space here, right? The space here is for something that we need, because let's say that the user typed in a U lowercase. So in this case, USA starts with a U uppercase. So in this case, USA doesn't start with a lowercase u. So to fix this issue here, I'm just gonna go and make this value uppercase and also the country name uppercase, then I will compare between them. Now I'm going to talk about the last thing, which is resetting the country list. So why do we need to reset the country list? Because when we search for a country here, we made some countries hidden and we left some countries shown up. So in this case, I need, when the user get back and click on the change button to change the country, when he sees the country list, I want the countries all to be there. So I want to show all the countries back. So here I'm going to use a function called reset country list, and always gonna do to loop over the country list, I'm going to use a for each here. So for each country, I'm gonna remove the hide class name from its class list. That's how I'm gonna show all the countries in the list. So that's it, guys. Now I think you are ready to type in the code. So in the next part, we're going to type in the code. We're going to open our text editors. So in this tutorial, I'm going to type in the HTML code, the CSS code, and JavaScript code. First, if you didn't subscribe yet, hit the button to subscribe and click also the bell to get notified about every new video. So let's go. So to follow the tutorial step by step, you're going to need to go and download the starter template from the repo on GitHub. You'll find the link in the description. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll go to the repo, then under repos, COVID-19 tracker. I'm gonna download this as a zip file. Then I'm just gonna copy the starter template. I will name this COVID-19, and then I'm gonna open my text editor. I'm gonna open the folder for my project. Then the files you're gonna find there are the style.css, which is empty, some images we're gonna need, then the app.js and the countries, and all the countries are there, then the index.html. Now let's type in the code for HTML. For the title here, COVID-19 stats with JavaScript. Then I'm going to link my style sheet. It's in resources, CSS, then style.css. Now I'm going to create the header, which contains the logo, which is an image. Then some text that says COVID-19 stats with a break there. Then a navigation with a URL list and some links that leads nowhere. Now I'm gonna go live. Now you can see what we get. Now we need to style them. First, I'm going to load the font we're going to use, and then I will copy this above. It's not gonna be here, it's gonna be here. And now for general CSS coding, every element, or all the elements, they part in the margin are set to 0, the box size in the border box, and the font family is going to be Gilroy. And sans serif if there was problems with loading the font. Now for the size, for the font size is going to be 16 by default. Then I'm going to add the class height to hide any elements I want. Then the fade and animation. So the animation is called fade. Then the timing 0.5 seconds. So for 0%, the opacity is going to be 0, and at 100%, the opacity will be 1. Now, for the header, the maximum width is going to be 1200 pixels, and the width is going to be 100%. The height is going to be 60 pixels. I'm going to set the display property to flex. I'm going to align the items center, so you can see them now centered. The margin is going to be 0 auto to center the header, and the background color is going to be this color here. Now you can see there the header. I'm going to go and style the logo. I'm going to display this also as flex. I'm going to first go and set the width of the image to 60 pixels. As you can see there. Now I'm going to align the items. I'm going to center them. I can see some dots there. Let's go to the HTML. Okay. Now I will go and add some left padding, 20 pixels. Then I'm going to style the text there. The font weight is going to be bold, and the color, it's going to be this one here. Now I'm going to set the property flex to 1, the same for the logo. But I think this is not working, so I'll just remove this, and then I will use the property justify content. So, and then I'm adding space between them, so that's what I want. Now I will go and set the display property of the ULS to flex. I'm going to make sure they are centered, so I'm going to align the items. Now I will go and set the list style to none. Then for the links, or for the last chart, I'm going to add some padding there. Padding right to 20 pixels. Just like we did with the logo. Now for the links, I'm going to set the text decoration to none. And the color is going to be the same for the one in the logo. I'm going to add some padding to space them. And that's it. So now you can see that the header is centered. It's begun to look responsive already. Now I will go to type in the code for the main. The main here has a div with stats class name. The max width of the main is going to be just like the one in the header. It's going to be 1200 pixels. The margin 0 auto to center it. Now I'm going to add the background image to our stats element. I'm going to set the width to 100%. In the background image, it's in resources. image and then the background image. You can't set there, so I'm gonna set the height to 60 pixels, 600 pixels. Now we're gonna size the background. I'm gonna set it to cover. Now I'm gonna add some layer, if you wanna say. So I'm gonna use the method linear gradient from a black color with opacity of 0.9 to the same color. So I can have some contrast there when I add some text above. Now we're going to add the latest report element, which has the country, and for the country name and the button change, then the total cases, then the one for recovered, and then for deaths. Now inside the country or total cases, it's gonna be the title that says total cases, and then for the value it's gonna be 0 when this first loads, and then for new value it's gonna plus 0. I'm gonna add the same things for recovered and deaths, except the title will be recovered here and it's gonna be deaths. Now inside the country, it's gonna be the name of the country, it's gonna be load in, and then the change button is gonna have a class name of change country. It says just change. Now let's go and style these. Now for the latest report, I'm gonna set the width to 80% of the width of the main, and the color of text is gonna be white. Now I'm going to set the property display to flex, and then I'm gonna justify content. I'm gonna add a space between the elements. Now I will add some margin, so set the margin to 0 auto to center the div, and I'm going to align items center. I will add some padding top, 50 pixels from the top. Now I will go and style the country, total cases, and recovered. Here I'm just going to set their height to 100 pixels, so they all have the same height. And now for the name of the country, it's gonna be this color. No, it's not. I'm gonna use this color instead. And then the font size is gonna be 2.2 EM, and then the font weight is gonna be bold. Now for the change country button, I'm gonna set the cursor to pointer, so it gives you the film that it's clickable. Now for the title, for total cases, recovered that, the font size will be 1.3 EM for all of them. Then for the total cases, that value, the font size is gonna be 2 EM, and then the font weight is gonna be bold. This is gonna be the same for all the others, except for the recovered, and that I'm gonna use different colors for text. So here the color is gonna be a green color, and here the color is gonna be a red color. Now for the new value, for all of them, I'm going just to change the font size. Now for the chart here, which we didn't create yet, so for the chart it's going to be outside the latest report, and inside we will have a canvas element with an ID, axis linear chart. I'm gonna go and set the chart width to 80% of the width of the main, and then 70% of the viewport height. The main height now is 500 pixels. The margin 0 auto to center the chart, and then the padding 50 pixels for top and bottom and 0 for right and left. Now here we need to add the HTML code for our search country box. So we have in our search box an input with an ID search input and a placeholder that says search country, and then we have an image, just an image, to close the search country list. The class name is going to be close, just to target it using JavaScript, and then this is where our countries will be shown in the country list. It will have some 3 lists. I'm just going to add these here just for styling. So for the search country element, the position is going to be relative. Then for the search box, the width or the position is going to be absolute. Now for the search box input and for the search box image, so the image here width is going to be 20 pixels. Now here the display property is going to be set to flex, and I'm going to center the items. Then justify content, I'm going to add space between. Now you can't say that yet. I'm adding now a width of 400 pixels. Now you can see the space between. The height is going to be 30 pixels. The Z index is going to be 1. So I make sure this be on top of the other elements. The background color. Now for the search box input, the width is going to be 360 pixels. The height is going to be 25 pixels. And then I'm going to add some, I'm going to get rid of the borders. I'm going to set them to none. Then the background color is going to be transparent. And the color of text now is going to be white. Then I'm going to add some padding there, padding left to 15 pixels. Now you can see if I type in something, it looks a little bit smaller. So I'm going to change the font size. Now I'm going to add set the padding right of the image to 5 pixels, and I'm going to set the cursor to pointer. Now here I'm going to, for the search country, top is going to be 10 pixels from the top, so to add some space there. Now for our country list element, this is where the countries are shown. I'm going to add a position absolute. Then the top is going to be just the top of the search box, which is 30 pixels. Now I'm going to add the same width, which is going to be 400 pixels. The height is going to be 300 pixels. I'm going to add the background color, the same one above. So it's going to be 111. Now for the opacity is going to be 0.9, 0.5. It looks great with 0.5, but I'm gonna now set the overflow to scroll. Let's go to our HTML code to add some other items there. I need to see here overflow for the y-axis only. Now for the country list UL list, then the country list UL li element, the list style is going to be set to none, and there the cursor is going to be pointer, so we can click on the country. The pattern is going to be 10 pixels to add some space there. Now the color is going to be white, but you can't see much of the white, so I'm going to set the opacity here to 1. Yep, so I'm going to get back here and say 0.9, so I can see the color of the country. Now for when I hover over the country, I'm gonna add a border left. I'm gonna set this to 1 pixel solid, and the color is gonna be white. So when I hover over, you can see the border left. I'm gonna get rid of this, and then I'm gonna add some lists. We have the 3 lists, right? Okay, now I want to make the list displayed horizontally, so I'm gonna set display to flex, and then I'm gonna justify content, right? I'm gonna set the justify content to space between again, but that's not what I want. I'm just gonna remove this space around. Okay, I don't like that, so I'm gonna just go and set the width of the UL list to 100 pixels, 100%. Okay, that's great. Now I will add, I will remove this, and then I will go and hide this by adding the class name hide. Okay, now let's go and add a footer to our code. We have the footer container, then a copyright element, and then it says copyright. I need here a symbol, so I'm gonna go get the symbol for copyright. So I should say symbol 2020 code explained. Now I want to set the footer max width to 1200 pixels, and then center it like all the others. The height is 60 pixels. The margin is going to be 0 auto to center the element. The background color is going to be this color here, the main color for our website. Now I want to center the text there vertically and horizontally, right? I'm gonna set the footer container height to 100 pixels, and then the display to flex, justify content center. So now I'm centering that horizontally. Now we want to center it vertically. I'm gonna go and do the same thing. I'm gonna set the display here to flex, and then the display or the flex direction to column, and then justify content center, and voila, I centered it vertically and horizontally. Now for the copyright text, the color is going to be white. That's it for the footer. Now I will need to make this a little bit responsive, so you can see here that's when I get to a small screen, the latest report doesn't fit, so I'm gonna add a media query for the screens with the width less than 600 pixels. Now for the latest report is gonna be, the display is gonna be set to flex, and then I'm just gonna set the flex direction to column to show them vertically. And then I'm gonna align items, flex start. So now you can see that it's looking really responsive. So that's great. Now that's it for the CSS for the whole thing. Now I'm just gonna add some CSS to style the scroll bar of our list. So I'm gonna go and style this here, the scroll bar here. I'm just gonna go and get style CSS from W3 schools. So this is the style code for scroll bar. Now here is just I'm just gonna edit or set the CSS for the country list, not the whole document. The background color is gonna be the same for the country list, and the color here is gonna be this color, and when I hover over it, it's gonna be white. Now this doesn't work with Firefox Developer Edition. I don't know why, but you can see that with Chrome it just works fine. So now I will go and remove that code from there and add the hide class name to our search country. Now it's time to create our country list. So adding all the lists to our country list. And also when I click on the change button, I want to show up the search country element. So first, I will go and link my JavaScript files. We have two scripts for now, the one for countries and the one for our app.js file. So I'm gonna go for our countries. We have there all the countries. Now the first thing, of course, is going to select all the search country elements. So I'm gonna select the elements using the query selector method. Here the class names search country. Then the other class names are close for closing the list, country list, change country, and search input. So these are the ones we need. I'm just gonna duplicate this 3 times. This one for a country list, and this one for the change country, and it's gonna be button. And this one is for the close button. Now, then for the input, I'm gonna use the get element by ID method. So it's gonna be search count input. Here it's gonna be close, the country list, and last the change country. Now I will create the list, the country list. So I'm gonna create a function called create country list, like you have seen in the logic part. The first thing we gonna get is the number of countries, which is just the length of our country list array. And then I'm gonna use an I variable set to 0, and this is the URL list ID. Then a for each method. Then here the arguments are country and the index of the elements. Now if the index modulo the math, that's CEL, of the number of countries divided by the number of UL lists, then the UL list ID is going to be just list dash then I. Then the country list element, that inner HTML plus equal, and then I'm gonna add the UL list with the ID in our UL list ID variable. And after that we're going to increment I by 1 each time, so I plus plus. Now the number of UL lists is gonna be 3. Then I'm gonna call the function create country list to create the lists. Now let's go and take a look on our console and use the inspector to check our HTML code. So it's gonna be inside the main, then inside the stats, the latest report, then inside the country, then the country, search country. Oh, we have there a lot of UL lists with the ID UL list ID. So I have here something wrong. So yeah, here it's gonna be the variable, not just the text, not just the string. And it's gonna be equal to 0. That's the condition. Now you can see that we have there 3 lists. Okay, my mistake. Now I will need to push the countries to each list. So I'm gonna select the list using its ID here, and then the inner HTML will be equal to, I'm using the backtext by the way, that's a nil I element there. Now it's gonna be just the country name that we show to the user, and then here we have onClick event, which is gonna call the function fetch data with the country name, and the ID here is gonna be just the country name also. So I will go there inside the lists, and you can see all the elements there. Now I will just go and remove the hide class name to show up the search country. Now you can see that the countries are clickable. The fetch data is not yet created. We will create that later. Now when I click on the change button, I want to show my list. So I'm gonna go and add some event listeners to my buttons there to show the list. Showing the list is just adding or removing the class name hide. So onClick the search country element that class list toggle hide. Now for the toggle method, what it does is it looks in the class list. If there was the class name hide, it will remove it from the class list. If it's not there, it will add it to the class list. Now I will go and add the animation fade in. So now when I click on the button, you can see that the animation there. Okay, now I will add an event listener to the close button. So when I click on the close button, I need to hide the class, the search country box. Now I will add another event listener to when I click on a country. So when I click on a country, we call the function fetch data, and then we make disappear the search country list. So I'm gonna add an element to the country list element. So now if I click on a country, you can see that it disappears. So now we need to, when I click or when I search for a country, I need to filter the countries and show only the ones that starts with the letters I typed in or the value I typed in the input. For that, I'm going to add an input there, an input event listener. So the input here, event, fires up only when the input value changes. Okay, so I'm gonna get the value of the input from there. So it's gonna be input that value. I'm gonna uppercase the value. Then I'm gonna console log now the value and check what's gonna happen. Let's go to change. If I remove this, you can see already that it's console login, and you see that it's uppercased there. Now I'm going to use a for each method to loop over all the countries inside the country list, and then if the country name to uppercase starts with the value the user has put in the input. And if this is true, I'm going to select the country. If you remember, the country name is the ID of the country element. So then I'm gonna just remove the hide from the class list of that country. Else I'm going to add the hide class name to the class list of the element. Now let's check that. So when I type in some letters, you can see that we filter out the list. And if I remove that, you can also see that the countries comes back again. Now when I click on change, when I click on change, I want to set the input value to none. I don't want that to be there. So now if I search for a country, for example, and then leave, when I come back, you can see that the input is now empty. Now you can see there is just the Spain country that is shown there. It's the last one I searched for. So here we need to reset the country list. So when I click back on the button, I want to reset the country. Resetting the country is just showing all the countries in our country list. So I'm just going to use the same code here, except I'm going to show all the countries. So I'm going to remove this condition here and remove the hide from all the countries there. Now if I go change, then search for a country, Spain, click on it. Now if I go and click on change again, I can find all the countries there. So now it's time to send requests to our API and get the data and display that to the user. So here I will go to our app.js file, right? The first thing again, of course, is select all the elements. So we need to change their inner HTML, so we need to select them. So the total cases, the recovered, that's also their values, their new values, also the canvas ID, all these need to be selected. I'm going to use the query selector to select these elements. Sorry, it's going to be country.name to select the country name, and here it's going to be for total cases to select the value, so we can change it. Here the new value. Now I'm going to call this total cases element, and it is going to be new cases element, and then I'm going to just copy this 2 times, duplicate that 2 times. Now this one will be for recovered element, and here new recovered element, and this is going to be that's, and here new that's. Then I'm just going to go and change this here, so this would be recovered. I'm going to copy this. This also going to be recovered for the new value. This is going to be that's. The same thing here, it's going to be that's. Now I will need to select the canvas. So I'm going to select the canvas using get element by ID. This is the ID, and then get the context. This is for our chat, by the way. Now I will need to create some variables to store data, the app data array, and the cases list array, and the recovered list array for recovered data, and then that's list array, and then dates array. Now I will go and get the user's country code using the Geo plugin API. So let's go and search for Geo plugin API. I'm gonna go to their website, how to use GeoPlugin web services. JavaScript, we're using JavaScript. Now we need to add this script tag to our HTML code, so I'm going to add it at the bottom here. Now I will use a function. The function is called GeoPlugin country code. I'm just going to copy the function. So here I will go and get the country code using that function, and then I will need to get the user's country name. So I'm gonna loop over my country list, which has all the countries there, using the for each method. So for each country, okay, so for each country there, it's gonna be if the country code in our country list, if the country, that code, the one in our country list, is the same as the country code we get from the API, then that's the user's country code, country name, sorry. Let's console log the country, the user's country. So if I refresh here, you can see France. I'm using a VPN here, so if I change the country, for example, to Japan, if I refresh now, you can see that it says that the country is Japan now. I'm gonna go and use another country, let's say Germany. If I refresh, you can see that it's changed. So now we can just get the country name of the user using their IP address. Now it's time to fetch the data from the API. So here you can find all the API URL and the key all already typed in for my account. So I created an account there in the API provider. Our fetch data will take in the user's country as a parameter. The country name we get from the API. I'm going to use then. So this is the response. This response is an HTTP response. We need to get the data, so we're going to pass them using JSON method. Then after that resolves, we need to get the data, which going to be in a JavaScript object. So when I console log that, you can see that we get the data, which now is an object, right? An JavaScript object. Now here, like you said in the logic part, we need to get the properties of that object using the object.keys method. So this will return all the enumerable properties of our object data. If I console log that, you can see now the array dates contains all the dates there. That's cool. Now we need to access the data object using the properties we got using the object.keys. So I'm going to use here a for loop. Now the data here is going to be data with index date. That's how you can access now the enumerable properties. Now I'm going to push all those to our app data, right? So here, if I take a look on the app data, you can find all the data there. That's great. Now I also will push the total cases into our cases list. So it's called total cases for the property. Now if I save, take a look on the cases list, you can see that the values here has a comma there, so we need to get rid of that comma using replace method. So I'm going to replace the comma
in the whole string with nothing, which means removing it. Now you can see that the comma is not there anymore. Now this is a string, so we need to parse end the value. So parse end. Now if I refresh, then take a look, now you can see that they are now actual numbers. If they aren't numbers, by the way, this can't work with our chart. So they have to be numbers. Now the same thing gonna happen with the recovered and that's. So here the property is total that's, and for recovered is total underscore recovered. I will take a look on our cases list. It's there, so the data are there. For the recovered list, the data is there. For the that's list, also the data is there. So we just got the data, so it's working just fine. Now we need to, after we finish sorting the data, we need to call a function called update UI. I'm just going to use an arrow function here, so I will use parentheses in our function update UI with parentheses. Now we need to catch errors that will happen. I'm just going to alert them to the user. Now it says that we have a problem there, or an error. Update UI is not defined. So I'm gonna go and update our. I'm gonna go and create the update UI function. The update UI function is just gonna go and update the statistics and update our chart. So just calling two other functions. I'm gonna comment this out for not getting that error again. Now the update stats here will go just and grab the last entry from our updata array. So with the index updated length -1, that's the last element in our array. Then I will console log that last entry. So you can see here, this is the day where I made this. Now we need to show these data here. Of course, like you have seen before, that we need also to get the before last entry. You know why? There's gonna be -2 here. And now I'm going to change the inner HTML of the country name element. Last entry dot country name. So it's Germany. There you can see. Now for total cases element, inner HTML is going to be last entry dot total cases. If I save, you can see the total cases now there, or 0. We will talk about that in a minute. Now recovered element dot inner HTML is going to be equal to last entry dot total recovered, or 0 again. Now if you took a look on the app data, when you took a look on the data, you can't find a new recovered, right? So we don't have the new recovered property there. That's why we're going to use the before last entry. So the new that is there, the new case is there, but the new recovered is not there. So here we need to use the before last entry to get that. So I'm gonna say minus the last entry total recovered minus the last entry dot total recovered. So total recovered of today minus the total recovered of yesterday is the today's new recovered. But it says 9. Why? You know why it says none? Because this is not a number, right? we need to replace the comma first with nothing, and then we need to pass this as an integer. Right, I'm gonna copy this here, just gonna go and paste it there. The same thing here, except here it's gonna be last entry. Now if I save, you can see that it's there. Now let's go and check if that's true. So here we have the last entry and before last entry. Before last entry, or the last entry is this one here. I'm just gonna go and remove the comma from there, minus the before last entry, total recovered. Now you can see there's 1600, the same result we got from there, except here we need to add a plus sign. So I'm gonna add the literal expression, so I'm using backticks there. Now if I save, you can see the plus sign there, plus then the number. Now we will just go and the code for the new cases. So I'm going to say here new cases element that inner HTML is going to be last entry new cases. I guess that's the name of the property. Let's check that. So yes, it's new cases, new that's true. Now here I'm gonna need to add the plus sign, right? Then I'm gonna change the that's element inner HTML to last entry dot total that's, and here it's gonna be new that's element to new that's. You can see that nothing is shown there. That's why we need to say or 0. So when the API returns an empty string for a value, it's gonna show nothing. So that's why we need to say or 0. So if we got an empty string from the API, then we're gonna use the value 0. So now I'm going to add the chart. So we're going to see the documentations from their website. Then we need to create the function access linear chart, and here I need to create a global variable called my chart. Now I'm gonna click on get started, go to access linear, and then grab the code for that. So here it's gonna be my chart. We have here an error. Okay, chart is not defined, so we didn't grab the code for our chart.js. So here I'm gonna copy this script tag and then implement that in our HTML code. So now I can already see something there. Now for the options, I'm gonna just set the responsive property to true and maintain the aspect ratio to false. Okay, now this has to be a comma. Okay, mistake. Now here the label is gonna be dates, right? Days is not defined, so it's gonna be dates, not days. Sorry. So dates. So you can see now the dates there. Now for the data sets, it's gonna be here cases, and here it's gonna be the array for the cases lists. fill is going to be false. Then border, it's going to be, the border color is going to be white. So you can always see it there. Then the background color for the dots is going to be also white. You can see now that it's looking thick, so I'm going to set the border width to 1. Now it looks just fine. I'm going to add the same properties for our recovered line. It's going to be recovered last. It's going to be that, and then it's going to be that's last. So you can see the lines there. Now I will need to change the colors. Here it's going to be green. The same thing for the background. It's going to be a red color, and the same thing for the background color. And that's it. Now I'm going to go and change the country. So I'm going to go click change the USA. Now you can see that we have there a mistake, right? An issue. Now it's really a little bit hard to find the issue from where it comes. You just need to think a little bit, and then you're gonna find the issue. So here in our fetch, when I call the fetch method, the first thing I'm going to do is to reset all my my arrays. Why? Because we are pushing new data to those arrays, so the old data is still there for the old country. So now when I click on this on any country, we reset those arrays, and then we push the new data. Now you can see that the old chart is still there. We talked about this. So here I'm gonna say if there was an old chart saved, we need to destroy that chart. So I'm gonna use the destroy method. So here, if I click on change, go to USA, if I hover over the line, nothing happens. So there is not an old chart there. So that's great. Now the only problem here is with the dates. I don't like the format of the dates, so I'm going to format the dates. I'm going to use just the day and the name of the month. So I'm going to create an array of months, of all the months actually, and then after the months names array is ready, I'm going to go and create a function to format the dates for me. Now my function here called format date is going to take as a parameter a date string, which is exactly what we get from our API, a date string. Now from that date string, I'm going to convert it, if you want to say, to a date, a JavaScript date. Then I'm going to return the day, right? Which is going to be date.getDate method. And then I'm going to get the month from our arrays, which is going to be months names, with date.getMonth. So here, getDate will return the number of the day, and getMonth will return the number of the month. So if it's 1, it's going to be February. If it's 3, it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3. It's going to be April. So this will return the number of the month. That's how I will get the name of the month. Now let's check if our function works. I'm gonna call the format date with a date string. So I'm gonna pass in the string 2020. So now you can see that
we formatted the date from a date string, and now it's showing the format we exactly want. Now you can see that the dates array has just date string. So I'm going to create an array called formatted dates. So we have dates and we have this formatted dates array. So the formatted dates array is just gonna be, I also need to reset it, of course, each time I call for new data. Here, inside here, I'm just gonna go and push a formatted date of each date. So I format all the dates and push them to our formatted dates. So now if I take a look on the formatted dates array, you can see that we have there all those dates formatted. Now I'm gonna take this array, and instead of dates, I'm gonna use the formatted dates. So now you can see the dates formatted. So, and they are looking amazing, better than the ones we used before. Now when I call the function here, fetch data, I will need to set back this to loading. So it gives the feeling that something's going in the background. So if I click on save, now if I go and check that, now you can see that it's showing loading there. So this is it, guys, for our tutorial. This is the end. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Don't forget to like my video, and if you didn't already subscribe, hit the subscribe button, and see you in the next tutorial.